Welcome to the Employee Advocacy and Influence podcast. My name's Lewis Gray. My co host, as always, is Elliot Elsley. And in today's episode, we're joined by Andy Lambert. Andy was part of the founding team behind Content Cal, which was acquired by Adobe, and he's also the author of Social 3.0. Andy is one of the leading voices challenging how brands think about social media today. And we actually just finished recording. And honestly, this is one of my favorite conversations to date. You'll hear why the old model of broadcast social no longer works, why trust and authenticity matter more than ever, and how employee voices play a vital role in shaping brand influence. We also get into practical strategies for building a decentralized content model, how to empower employees to create more authentic content, and what marketers should prioritize if they want their programs to succeed in 2025 and beyond. Whether you're leading an employee advocacy program or just trying to make your brand less boring, this is an episode you won't want to miss. So let's get into it. Amazing. Okay, so Andy, first and foremost, thank you for joining us. Would you mind just telling our listeners a little bit about yourself and your experience with employee advocacy?
Yeah, well, thanks for the invite, Lewis. Good to be here. My background is, I'll keep it short. So 9 years ago, co-founded a social media technology business called Content Cal, became one of the fastest growing in the space to a point where Adobe noticed it and bought us for some ungodly amount of money in 2021. And so now I work on building products for Adobe to help businesses, tens of millions of businesses across the world, do their social media better. And how it links to employee advocacy is that when you think about how you build businesses and how you build trust and word of mouth at scale, your employees, your founders are all a critical part of starting that word of mouth engine for the business. So yeah, I have thoughts on this topic.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I can't wait to dig into all of this. So, just starting right off the bat, for anybody that's unfamiliar, Andy's written a fantastic book called Social 3.0. And Andy, in that book, you've described a big shift in how social media works today. So, obviously, for anybody unfamiliar, could you just walk us through that?
Yeah, again, a very high level. I'll let you read the book. But to be honest with you, there was nothing groundbreaking in that book. It was just trying to apply first principles thinking to social media. Oftentimes in social media, we get obsessed with like the tactics and the little hacks that we can do to drive growth. And there's some value in that. But actually, to be honest, given how quickly social media changes, the whole reason I wrote the book was let's just think through this from a first principles perspective. What are the non-changing laws that govern success on social media? And I think the main call to arms that I had as a result of the book, which was I want businesses, not just marketing teams, to take social media more seriously. Social media is not a channel, it's not a tactic, it's a business strategy. Like trying to distill social media down to like, oh, it's social media is like our email, or let's just bang the post out on social, and thinking about it so flippantly like that, it's a huge miss in my eyes. And I wanted to reframe how we think about social, particularly written through the lens of B2B, because my context and my sphere of influence has always been B2B. It's the only industry I've worked in, the only category I've worked in. So, and social media is criminally undervalued in B2B. And you see the most modern businesses, they understand this, and we'll get into some like examples later on, but the fastest growing businesses in the world understand that social media is something that's imbued across the whole organization's DNA, the fabric and the culture of the business. Social media is at the core of it. It's how people recommend you. It's how you build word of mouth. All the things that we all know. We all seem to lose our minds in marketing when we're like, oh yeah, just put it on social media, it'll be fine. It's like, no, think about it more strategically, please. And that's what Social 3.0 was all about.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think it does surprise me when I still hear about organizations who are kind of treating it like just a broadcast channel, and just as a almost like an afterthought, like you
Yeah,
say, it's just let's just throw this out on social. It's not just a box to tick. It is, like you say, it's a strategy, and it's where you need to be. It's where a lot of businesses are generating the most impact, especially in the B2B space. But I suppose there is that old adage in the world of B2B marketing that unfortunately we are usually the last ones to adopt ongoing
unfortunately.
trends.
Yeah, unfortunately, that is the case. Yep.
I think you always see that with the it's always the growth hacking is the term that sometimes makes me wildly uncomfortable if I hear somebody say it out loud, to be perfectly honest. Yeah, speaking to that, the amount of conversations you hear from people where they've read a LinkedIn post, which is a copy paste of an Instagram post, which is a copy paste of something else that says these are the 9 steps that you need to get engagement on LinkedIn, and you've got to clap your hands 5 times before you post it, and all of these different things. I think that's such a world that cheap tricks that don't last very long is a shame when people are talking about that massively from my perspective.
Agreed. Agreed.
There's something we touched on, or I guess I've deliberately teed up here when I talk about broadcast, is something that you often talk about, Andy, is this idea of broadcast social. But how would you define that, and why is it no longer effective?
Yeah, I think this is just a case of how social media has matured. And when we say broadcast social, we mean putting content in our company feeds or pages and hoping people will respond, treating social media as we would our email, right? So, and that's typically what social media is seen at. And when you think like, even makes me cringe just saying, oh, that's how social media works. Social media is how 5.4 billion people across the world connect. You can't just say social media is a channel, right? It's how opinions are formed. It's how people are inspired, informed, engaged. It's the way that the culture of our society is developed. It's like saying electricity or water is good for X, Y, Z. It's too broad. So that's why I'm like, yeah, it absolutely needs to be treated as a strategy. So broadcast social is about brands that treat their company pages, feeds just purely as that broadcast medium. Hey, we got a promotion. Hey, guess what? We've launched this new thing. Pop it on our LinkedIn company page. Let's see who bites. Funnily enough, no one does, because no one cares what the company has to say about themselves. And yeah, and then we get into this situation. I had this kind of saddening conversation the other day with a B2B marketer where him and the whole of his team got laid off recently, team of 10. And I was like, why? You know, I'm so sorry to hear it, but why? They were like, well, we weren't seeing as much growth throughout the business, and so they decided to trim back some operational expenditure, and you know, my team was first to go. And I'm like, oh my good lord, are we in a position where we're just seeing social media as a discretional cost? And we see this in economic cycles, in marketing in general. It's seen as a discretional cost, where it's like, okay, we'll dial it up when times are good, when times are bad, we'll dial it down. And guess what? The people that have dialed it down when the economic cycle, again, like it always does, it's a cycle, it gets better, it gets worse. When people have underinvested in marketing, you just see that they are the businesses that are slowest to grow. So it's like compounding misery when businesses take that approach. Anyway, gone off on a little tangent, but the point is like, that's why I have such a distaste for broadcast social and everything it stands for, because it isn't baked in strategy, and it's seen as like a discretional, let's put it out there, because we haven't appreciated and understood the inherent value of social at large.
I think where that can also, and what I've seen in the past as well, is that defines strategy. So they go through that broadcast social, well, we posted these things onto the company LinkedIn page, in which case, you know, you're at the whim of the algorithm to some degree in all of these things, right? Sometimes stuff blows up and we have no idea why, particularly, but that then defines strategy. Well, we got lots of likes on this post and this product offering, and we got none on this one. So obviously we should just pivot directly into this direction. That's equally as scary from that perspective as well, where people are making decisions based on very, very like minimal input outside of, well, this got a lot of likes and therefore my vanity is up, so I'm just going to drive this part of the business forward.
Yeah, and that all links to a misunderstanding of the metrics that matter. And when we focus and zoom in too much, we look at those micro signals, which can be helpful for guiding, you know, broader content strategy at a more tactical level. But when we think about our broader business's approach to social, we need to zoom out. there are other metrics that matter way more than followers, likes, or anything like that. And maybe we'll talk about metrics later on, but that again is one of those things that holds social media back in larger businesses, because unfortunately social media folk are typically the most junior in most organizations, and they oftentimes don't communicate in the language of the boardroom, C-suite, the language of business. And that's why, like, followers and engagement, like, no one cares. A CEO doesn't care. And they can't make that correlation between what we're seeing on social and how it's driving the economic engine of our business. But the correlation is so easy to see if you know where you're looking. And typically for me, and I said we'll go into it later, but I'm on the thread, so let's get into it now, is I've always held the metric of share of voice as the most important metric that has governed the growth of our business. It's our single window into our brand health. Fundamentally, the simple rule of marketing is, if people are speaking about us more than our competition, we will grow. So if our share of voice is bigger than our market share, and this is what we always used to think about from a content cloud perspective, our main competitor was Hootsuite, obviously big, chunky behemoth in the space, you know them well. They had 20% market share. We probably had sub 5%, but our share of voice was equivalent to theirs. Unsurprisingly, that meant that we grew. It's our leading indicator. Everything else is a lagging indicator. We don't care about how many people like that post from a strategic level, because that's for tactical stuff. What we care about is that, oh, right, well, our sentiment is strong, very positive. We're being mentioned across these key press outlets. We are seeing more people speak about us than our competition. Guess what? Look at the lead flow in our top of funnel. It's stronger than it ever has been. And when you understand how marketing shapes demand like that, then you start to realize that, oh, right, marketing, and social media is the most significant part of that. Marketing plays such a pivotal role into the success of a business. If only every CEO understood that, then we'd be onto a winner.
It's so interesting to hear you say share of voice is the primary metric, because I have exactly the same feeling. Translating that to people is a very difficult thing at times. In my experience, it's not the easiest metric for people to wrap their heads around. We actually do this internally from a disseminate perspective, and part of our process, we do share of voice for employees. So employees share of voice as opposed to corporate. The same principle applies. It's actually sometimes easier to explain from that perspective, because you can say you have 500 salespeople within the business, and 50 of them have posted onto social media in the last month or so. That means you've got a 10% of your business. Compare that against all of your competitors. It's a really, really easy metric for them to kind of show. It's like, you can trivialize it massively almost to go to a corporate event. If you went to an event and you put 500 of your sales team in that event, they're going to talk to absolutely everybody, because there's 500 of them against 10 from every other competitor. And it's trying to frame it in that kind of format for people where they go, oh, I understand. Like, this isn't about the best post. This is just sheer economies of scale in the grand scheme of things. And it correlates for us across all these businesses: employee size, corporate following, like the number of employees at a business and their corporate social media following. They're pretty well correlated across all industries. And there are outliers that are doing it well, and there are outliers that are doing it very badly. And it's the same principle with employees as well. They just correlate so clearly for these businesses that aren't strategizing these things.
Yeah, it's good to hear that you're doing that for your clients too. So yeah, fully agree.
Big part of what we do.
Andy, something that you've spoken about time and time again, both in your book and then on social media, you've emphasized the importance of authenticity, of trust, and adapting to this decentralized content model. How do these themes shape what effective social media looks like today?
Now I'm going to try and keep myself off my soapbox here, because this is the topic that I spend most of my time thinking and talking about, as you say. And this is just getting more and more important. And when I say this, is what I mean by this specifically is how people trust our brand, and how people come to form their preferences for what product or service that they buy. It is undergoing a tectonic shift right now. And not to overstate the point, but look what's happening on Google search. 60% of all searches end without a click. That is huge for particularly B2B brands, which typically care about SEO or PPC or some LinkedIn ads. Typically, they're your 3 growth channels for most B2B brands. Now, think about that, what that means when one of those primary growth channels, SEO, suddenly looks very different to what it just did. And then when you think about the broader landscape of tech, which is what most B2Bs are in, some form of technology, you think how commoditized most of these products and offerings are, and the way that most people position their products. We're the fastest, best, cheapest, most reliable, yada, yada, or insert all of the B2B typical positioning nonsense that we hear, like real corporate rubbish. You think about all of this. The buyer then goes, well, I'm in a sea of sameness, and the way that I'm being informed by Google looks completely different when I'm searching on Perplexity or ChatGPT, etc. So, like, how is my preferences being formed? And they're typically being formed in places that we can't see or track, right? Trust is being formed in those safe spaces, those corners of the internet where trust reigns supreme. Now, trust is the number one thing that we should be thinking about from everything we do from a B2B marketing perspective, because where trust runs deepest is in those spaces where you trust that individual. That might be a creator, that might be an influencer, that might be a founder of a company, or that might be one of the employees from a company that you follow. Trust is earned over time, and typically, the old adage goes, eyes earn trust, which usually means it's a human you're going to trust more than a brand. And you look at like the Edelman Trust Barometer Index is something that I always pay quite a lot of attention to. You're nodding along, so it looks like you've seen it too. And it's, unsurprisingly, you're seeing like societal trust in broader organizations, whether it's politicians, whether it's, no doubt politicians on a downward trend, or media outlets. The trust is increasingly happening in those influencers, creators, those individuals that we follow online. We might not know them personally, but we feel like we know them. And this is where, employee advocacy is a huge component of how a business builds trust. Because whilst, I spend a lot of time, it's a final point on this, I spend a lot of time thinking about how businesses build their sphere of influences with influential voices and communities around the organization. And quite frankly, it's what we did so well at Content Cal. We became so well known in the circles that our audience ran in that we seemed much bigger than we were. And increasingly, people would always say to me, like, you guys are everywhere. And of course we're not. We didn't have the budget for that. But we're just in everywhere those people spend time. So I think that's a really important point. And that's why employees is where this whole process starts, this whole process of building our spheres of influence, right? So it starts firstly, if we can't build that trust and build that belief in our brand at our fundamental level, which starts with the exec teams. And I'm very passionate about this. I'm not actually sure I love your take on this. Like, I don't think employee advocacy really works until we've got exec level buy-in from this, where we've got a CEO doing it, or someone on the C-suite going like, this is the way forward. It starts there, then that kind of trust radiates out from inside the business to your evangelical customers, to like creators and communities, podcasts and newsletters and influencers, and then your kind of Gartner Magic Quadrants and Forrester reports. It's like you see how those circles like expand on each other like a ripple that goes through the industry. And that is, quite frankly, how B2B brands grow.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. The advocacy side of things, when you talk about executives, it's categorically true. I think you can run a successful advocacy program without executives, and I will give credit to those that I know that have done that. But if you want to do it at scale and make it a company initiative, then it has to come from the executives, and it has to be, led. You just lead from the front essentially with these things. And I think your point is so important of the differentiation from the brand. The person that always, or more recently, comes to mind when you talk about, I see you every Rory Sutherland, who you can't really get away from at the moment on any degree of marketing content. Now, I will hedge. There are a lot of people that probably don't know what Ogilvy is as a business, but they would know who Rory Sutherland is. That's the person you want to be enabling to be able to do this. If it's your CEO, if it's your CTO, like whoever it is, it doesn't really matter. Just enable people to talk to their audience. And maybe you end up with a Rory Sutherland and you get to print money hand over fist, or but you'll grow that no matter what. And I think that's a really interesting element. Where do you stand on the kind of community side of things as well? It's something I was in a meeting quite recently with a company that was self-aware enough to be able to recognize, hey, there's wider spheres than LinkedIn and other areas. They did then say, why don't we just put it on Reddit, which I think countered their original point slightly. But you talk about ChatGPT, the kind of growth of all of these different kind of communities and areas people talk to. Like Reddit is one of the big ones from that perspective of human interaction.
I love the point. Reddit is so significant right now, as is other microcosms across the internet. And I speak about this lots. I just see an increasing bifurcation of social media, where on one side it is quite broadcasty for sure, and it is probably more. And I'm thinking specifically about like short form video focus channels, where it's more akin to Netflix and social media, right? So it's like broad reach, awareness. Doesn't really matter how many followers you have. That is quite a lot of how social media is getting consumed across Insta Reels, TikTok, etc. That's like at a macro level. But the interesting thing, the thing that's like really capturing my attention is that because there's a constant shift away from the social element of social, less interaction is happening in public. That interaction is shifting to increasingly small spaces. That might be Blue Sky, that might be Threads, that might be Reddit, that might be Discord, that might be Substack. There's a whole range of them. We're seeing a plethora of these platforms grow. And this is what excites me as someone that builds B2B brands, because I'm like, well, influence is starting to get pushed out to the edge. That means that we don't necessarily need like one influencer with 300,000 followers on LinkedIn to do the job for us. In fact, increasingly they won't, because LinkedIn restrict reach so much. Actually, it's going to behoove us to work in these smaller communities and work with those individuals. And even better, if we can, this then takes employee advocacy into a slightly new territory, where like point one, we just want to get people posting on LinkedIn, right? But as we go beyond that, we want those people that really get it to start showing up in these spaces. And showing up in these spaces requires a delicacy of touch that if you don't understand it, it's hard for me to articulate it, because it's not like I'm going to turn up on Reddit and imagine we've got like, r/employee advocacy. I'm not going to turn up as a disseminate rep going like, guess what? Disseminate's the best product ever, because you're going to get torn apart for doing something like that. But if you're part of that conversation, having an interesting dialogue around employee advocacy, at some point in that dialogue, it's probably going to be mentioned of like what tools you recommend. There might be a few, Disseminate might be one of them, but you've earned the right to then promote, and it's just about, it's very hard for businesses to understand, particularly B2Bs that are just like, we've got something to say, get it out there, folk, like got a promotion, drive those leads, MQLs, SQLs, and they get the short-term tension that exists here. And then of course, that short-term focus of like trying to drive the pipeline exists. I've built a startup, I get it, but it just needs to be balanced better with like long-term brand building efforts, focusing on how do we ingratiate ourselves and our organizations across all of these communities, which might be empowering our employees to do that, or it might be working with creators that already run those communities. Sorry, that was a long answer, but hopefully it makes sense.
It was a good answer. I think it ties into the more simplistic level from an advocacy perspective as well. It's right content, right people is a phrase that we bound around quite a lot. It's very, and the people that are best at employee advocacy across our portfolio of clients and what you see elsewhere, they categorically are doing this. It's sales teams that are being provided content for their vertical, for the industries that they deal in, for the product that they sell. It's not that general, again, back to that broadcast concept. It's not hey, we're just really good at this. Here's our product stuff, and just generalizations. It's niche and it's targeted and it's focused. And that's what I think where we will see shift in AI and functionality from that perspective to really kind of grow that more nuanced content for an individual to be able to utilize rather than that kind of generalized company content.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, I mean, we've spoken about advocacy, we've spoken about social media. Andy, I know you've touched on newsletters in the past. I guess what a lot of listeners might be wondering is why. So, for the sake of speaking on their behalf, what practical steps can brands take to build a decentralized content model that still aligns with their tone and the company's values?
Yeah, and I think this is another interesting one where I probably have some counter views on like company tone and brand policing. So I'm a big fan of not over fixating on our brand tone. Yes, we need some consistency. Yes, so our visual identity needs to have some consistency. Yes, we need to speak in a language that our audience speak in, right? And sometimes I do see a mismatch in a lot of businesses between like how they think tone should be and how the audience actually speaks. So always align that. But quite frankly, the opportunity that you have when working in a more kind of decentralized way, and when you say decentralized, my head goes to obviously employee advocacy, and it goes broadly into like working with creators and influencers across newsletters, podcasts, yada yada, basically all the things. I think there's just a broader understanding that I would love every executive to know is that unfortunately, as much as you'd like to, you cannot control the narrative around your business, right? As much as you think this is your tone, yeah, okay, fine. That might be your tone that you put on your website. But quite frankly, your audience do not care about that. And they will speak about you in the way that they deem fit. So it serves you well to not over control this. And suddenly you turn, and I've seen this happen in employee advocacy programs that, others in my sphere have run. They've tried to over manage it. It ends up looking incredibly dehumanized. It looks corporate. Our levels of trust in brands is diminishing. So our trust in other fellow human beings, if they show up and add value regularly, and we see them frequently in our feeds, our trust is going there. So the last thing that we want to do as part of any program that's going to either empower our employees, our executives, our partners, creators, influencers, whoever, the last thing we want to do is prescribe things too much, to say, please don't use these words, please do this. Of course, there are some principles. Don't swear, don't say things that are stupid or defamatory or anything like that. Basically, don't be an idiot is the rule here. But that's quite frankly it, as far as I'm concerned. We want to empower. If we're talking about empowering our teams, you can't say, oh, we're going to empower our teams to do this and then disempower them by taking a load of that freedom back. It's not how it works. And I want to point to a really recent example here. So a guy called Alex Lieberman, who runs Morning Brew, huge newsletter, and he runs an agency called StoryArb. And what they've just done at StoryArb is launch a new employee advocacy program, empower all of their employees. And they left it completely carte blanche. So they left it to their employees. Again, this is why I think executives are important to be part of this, because Alex has been the trailblazer of this. He's been the one that everyone looks to go, oh, wow, Alex has created the life of his dreams by building a personal brand. And what StoryArb got right is that they got the incentives right, like financial incentives. And they also said, no, like this is about you building your personal brands. And as a result, lifting up StoryArb in the process. And this is what so many businesses don't recognize. They're like, oh, if they want to go down the route of employee advocacy, they're like, okay, well, why don't we just get this corporate LinkedIn post and then basically just use our employees to reshare it and bang it out in their feeds too. And unsurprisingly, guess what? The results of that will be. So again, that is akin to broadcasting. Again, it's just a different approach. So the TLDR here is like, I believe in this wholeheartedly, provided that you don't try and control it, but more importantly, you're not brand policing this with tone of voice and that stuff, and you're making it about them. So if we're going to empower team members to do it, we have to make it about them, which is like, advocate for themselves, and as a result, their companies, and then we'll be on to a winner. And, as we saw to round this out, as we saw a StoryYard publish their results for their employee advocacy program, and their employees were generating more impressions than Alex's recent post, even though he had 400,000 followers, because they're generating such interesting new perspectives about what their day-to-day challenges are in their own role. And as a result, it means StoryYard grew a bucket load of new followers on the page and a whole load of new inquiries. So it's there for the taking. You just need to think about this first principles and not try and see this just as another distribution channel.
I completely agree. I think, to be contrarian ever so slightly to that point, it is so much, and I'm going to use the term easier, but it's not always easy, as a smaller business to do that. When you've got 50, 100 employees, it's a much easier mandate to just throw out there to go, we're going to pay everybody X, we're going to do Y to incentivize this behavior, carte blanche, do what you want, go nuts, get us a load of engagement impressions, develop your own personal brands. We want to empower that. When you're 30,000, 50,000, an Adobe sized business, it's a very different ball game to kind of play in from that perspective, because, to be candid, I guess the level of common sense and the lowest kind of common denominator that you sometimes have to work to in the world, you have to start to bank in that as a factor. I think for me, one of the big things with advocacy is it shouldn't be prescribed content. It shouldn't be, here is your content you get to share today, and it's nice and readily packaged. It's, here is a group of content. Here's an option, a feed of content that you could utilize if you want to. And that's, when you're doing it at scale, I think the thing that's really matters to encourage employees is most people just don't know what they should or shouldn't or could or couldn't share. So just giving them that access point to go, here's a load of stuff we'd love for you to work off of. That's the difference maker. And that's the kind of more utopia view of like disseminate usage from my perspective, is people don't need this stuff. It's just here as a helping hand to kind of speed that process up for them.
I get that from an inspiration perspective for sure. And like we'll see in many different programs, there are levels. There are people that will never be interested in this, don't care. But that's not an excuse for businesses then to go, no, that's fine. Let's dial it back. Let's control the narrative. No, again, it is so context specific and nuanced as well. That's hard to give like general broad advice, but yeah,
it's the same principle as broadcast social, right? You can't give a social media landscape or just a generalized, well, we just put this on social. It's the same kind of principle with advocacy. You can't just go, we'll just give this to the employees to share, because what your executives are going to talk about and what this person and that person are going to talk about are just wildly different.
I do just have one final question, Andy, because I'm conscious of time, but what piece of advice would you give to marketers trying to get a advocacy personal branding program off the ground in 2025?
The most important thing, I think, is deeply internalizing what your success criteria is, whether that's share of voice growth, whether that's whatever. What is that North Star metric you want to lean towards? The important thing is that this is not a tactic. This is a strategy, and it's not something you pick up and put down because you'll never get any results. You need to lean into this into the long term. So any marketer needs to deeply internalize what we're trying to do today. And for me, it would be, I would be caring deeply about how we could map share of voice growth and see that as like the primary North Star for this. And of course, there's loads of corroborative data points like lead volume, sales cycles, all that stuff we could put into it. But basically internalize what that single North Star success criteria is, and go after this and deeply think, do we have the right appetite to go after this? Do we have the right executive level buy-in for this? Because it needs to come from the top down. We can't ask people to do the things we're not willing to do ourselves, right? This has to be from the top, and has to be a deeply internalized, imbued part of how we go to market as a business. Like, we understand, speaking as a business, we understand that to build buyer preference, we need to work through individuals, of which part of that will be our employees, and part of that is, other individuals we'd work with too. And for us to execute on this, these are the things that we need to do. And this is our defined tactic or strategy that we are not pivoting from, because we're going to give this the next 2 years for this to play out. I think that is the number one thing what we need to do, because I know obviously you represent an employee advocacy tool. What you can't do is go buy a tool and go, okay, cool, I bought the tool. We're doing employee advocacy now, because then people will cancel the tool and nothing will happen. It's going to, deeply at the strategic level, internalize North Star metrics, and then absolutely lead from the front.
I absolutely love that as well. Yeah, we often say, get culture and content in place. You can't just, you can't just buy a tool and expect this thing to take off. Company culture is everything if you don't have a culture of sharing. And if you don't have content, there's nothing for people to share anyway. So a tool won't fix all the problems. As you say, there's work to be done beforehand. But Andy, thank you so much for your time today. Honestly, this has been an absolute pleasure. A lot of what's been discussed is kind of what we feel like we're screaming about all the time. So it's great to hear you're aligned on a lot of our viewpoints here. But Andy, for anybody who wants to keep up with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Funnily enough, LinkedIn. So you'll find me there and all of the other stuff I talk about in general. But yeah, and funnily enough, because it's so top of mind, I'm writing another book about this very topic called The Spheres of Influence. So of which employee advocacy is a huge part of. So anyway, there's a little plug. Stay tuned for my next book, but I'll talk about it on LinkedIn, obviously. So there we go.
Glad to hear it. I will be staying tuned. Thank you, Andy. Take care.
Cheers.